Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIX. I'm Jangho Kim, Associate Director of GWIX. Thank you for joining today's North Korea Economic Forum panel discussion, which is co-hosted with the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University. The speakers will present in English. However, for the roundtable discussion and Q&A that follow, we will provide simultaneous interpretation. To access interpretation, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select either Korean or English. Now, let me turn it over to Celeste Arrington, Director of GWIX, and Bum-Soo Kim, Director of the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies, for their opening remarks. Celeste, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yono. It's a great pleasure to welcome you this morning or this evening to this webinar on a very timely topic. Before I get going, let me acknowledge the hard work of Yono Kim, Associate Director of GWIX, in organizing this timely webinar. I think as the rest of the world, we're trying to figure out how economies around the world are responding to or being impacted by the Trump administration's policies. And so today we'll drill down into the effects on North Korea's economy with some eminent speakers. At GWIX, we're especially pleased to continue our partnership with the Institute of Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University and its director, Bum-Soo Kim. We've had the pleasure of working with Seoul National University on a variety of different projects, including policy briefs every month and this North Korea Economic Forum. And I really want to thank you for this continuing partnership. Today, I'd also like to extend thanks to the North Korea Economic Forum Steering Committee, which is led by Rachel Min-young Kim and Troy Stangarone, and of course, under the leadership as well of Yono Kim. He originally designed this North Korea Economic Forum to be a unique platform in which we can really drill into economic issues in North Korea. There's a lot of discussions about various aspects of North Korea, but I think our North Korea Economic Forum is unique in its focus on the economic dimensions of the North Korean issue. And it has really become a go-to place, I think, in large part due to Yono Kim and the rest of the steering committee's hard work. I would be remiss in not thanking our GWIX staff, Program Manager Ravina Ugale and Program Coordinator Takara Askew for managing the logistics of today's webinar. So I'd like to extend a great thanks to them for their hard work. As we move into today's discussion, I'm very honored to welcome the speakers today, and I appreciate all of you for joining us on this webinar. So thank you again, and let me turn it over to our partner from Seoul National University, Bum-Soo. Go ahead.
Thank you, Celeste. Yes, on behalf of the Institute of Peace and Unification Studies of Seoul National University, I would like to welcome all of you to join today's webinar, the Trump 2.0 administration and the North Korean economy. As you know, this webinar co-hosted by the Institute for Korean Studies at GW University. As all of you already know, since President Trump's inauguration on January 20th, his administration has implemented many significant policy shifts which impact all around the world. In the midst of this transition period, today, our distinguished panelists will explore recent trends in North Korea economy and its trade relation with Russia and China. I think it is very timely and relevant to examine these issues and hope all of you enjoy today's webinar. Finally, I would express my sincere thanks to Director Arrington, Associate Director Yono Kim, and all staff members of GW Institute for Korean Studies for coordinating and preparing all the arrangements. And great thanks to our distinguished panelists for their insightful and informative presentation. Thank you.
Let me start the panel discussion by briefly introducing the speakers. In the interest of time, I would encourage the audience to refer to our event announcement for the full bios. Our first speaker is Jangho Choi, a research fellow at the Korea Institute for National Unification, or KINU. Before joining KINU, she worked at the Bank of Korea. Her primary research interests include North Korea's fiscal and financial systems, informal economy, and demographic issues. Our second speaker is Jangho Choi, Head of International Cooperation for the Korean Unification Team at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, or KIEP. His research has focused on North Korea's trade, international relations, the Greater Tumen Initiative, and regime transition in North Korea. Our third speaker is Bruce Klingner, a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at the Asian Studies Center of the Heritage Foundation. He previously served as Deputy Division Chief for Korea at the CIA, and before that, as Chief of CIA's Korea branch. Last but not least, we have Choi Stangarone, Director of the Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy, and the Deputy Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the Wilson Center. He also proudly serves as co-chair of the North Korea Economic Forum here at GWIX. And before joining the Wilson Center, he was Senior Director and Fellow at the Korea Economic Institute of America. With that, Ji-young, let me start with you. I'd like to ask about the latest developments in the relationship between the state and market in North Korea. The stage is yours now.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. My presentation is about the recent policy shift of North Korean authority and its impact on the market indicators. This is based on my recent article released at the end of last year. And I have been interested in the policy shift of North Korean authority in terms of consumer good distribution as well as the fiscal and financial system. I think that there is some consistency of this policy shift. So that is what I will discuss today. I believe that the recent increasing volatility of market indicators was one of the interesting issues of North Korean economic area. As you can see, these are the representative market indicator of North Korea. Left one is the rice price, and right one is the market exchange rate to US dollars. As you can see, from 2013 to 2022, market indicators has maintained the relatively stable trend. However, from 2021, it started to increase. In particular, last year, the market indicators volatilities increased sharply. Therefore, they reached the highest level after the currency reform in 2009. So I think that there are two characteristics of recent market indicators. First one is the market exchange rate have been increasing much faster than rice price. At the end of the last year, market exchange rate increased by more than 150%, while the rice price increased by 80% compared to same period of previous year. The second characteristic is the decoupling among market indicators, in particular market exchange rate. Left figure shows the dollar exchange rate and yuan exchange rate in North Korean market. As you can see, until 2021, two exchange rates showed a similar trend. However, from 2022, each exchange rate showed a different rate at some point. And right figure shows the dollar to yuan exchange rate in North Korean market and international market. From first quarter in 2020, we can witness the divergence of exchange rate. As you know, from 2000 2020 to 2021, North Korean authority conducted a very strong border control. So that policy could explain the divergence of the market exchange rate. However, from 2022, despite the resumption of foreign trade, we can still witness the divergence of exchange rate. So it suggests that there is some shock that cannot be explained the market principles. I think that the shock was the policy shift of North Korean authorities to strengthen the state intervention on overall economy. They amended the several laws related to consumer goods distribution and price and payment. They amended the grain distribution law and the socialist commerce law to introduce the state sale channel as one of the state distribution system. I think we need to focus on the introduction of state sale channel. That is the considerable change on consumer goods circulations. When they amended the grain distribution law, they began to establish the grain sales centers nationwide. Since then, North Korean people can buy grain at grain sales centers with lower price than market price. However, the quantity available for purchase is limited, and overall quality of grain is lower than market. And also, they amended the price law and the central bank law. I understand they intended to collect and manage the information related to price and payment. When they amended the price law, they introduced the establishment of information system for price management. So I understand this is kind of the platform for controlling price information. And also they made the production unit to register their price information to price management institutions. And also they published the National Unified Price List and distributed it each store in 2024. Regarding the central bank law, they emphasized the informatization in central bank operation and introduced the establishment of electronic payment system. Let's examine what state sale channel is. Before the recent policy shift, the consumer goods circulation is divided into two parts, the plant sector and market sectors. As you all know, the existing state supply system, the rationing system is collapsed in 1990s, and the market sale is replaced to existing state supply system. Through the recent policy shift, North Korean authority included the state sale channel as one of the state distribution system. I understand that the North Korean authority wanted to replace the existing market sale to the new state sale, and also they wanted to reduce the existing market sale. This policy shift could affect the market transactions. When they amended the grain distribution law, they amended law related to collective farm in order to strengthen procurement of grain from collective farm. In order to operate the grain sales center, they needed more grain. That is the reason why the authority increased the procurement from collective farm. So this measure could affect the market transaction of grain. This could decrease the market supply of grain and also increase the market price of grain. And also, I mentioned the North Korean people cannot buy grain at grain sale centers. Therefore, there is excessive demand in the North Korean market. So, as market indicator factors rise, the North Korean people could have the precautionary saving demand. So that could affect the increase of overall market price. So this is a summary of the circulation of consumer goods and foreign currency. Regarding grain, there are three types of pricing. First one is the state supply price. At food supply center, the rice price is 2,000 North Korean won, which is raised from 48 North Korean won at the beginning of 2024. And second price is the price of grain sale centers. Last year, I tried to collect the price information of grain sales center on three regions of North Korea. Rice price of Siniju was around 4,000 North Korean won in December 2023. It is higher than the state supply centers price by around 2 times. However, it is lower than the market price by around 20%. There is the similar structure of the foreign currency exchange. Official exchange rate to US dollar is around 100 North Korean at a bank. However, there is another formal sector foreign currency exchange channel. They call it the cooperative currency exchange centers. Cooperative exchange rate was 9,000 North Korean won, according to news report. It was much higher than the official exchange rate. However, at that time, market exchange rate was around 16,000 North Korean won. So there is a huge gap between cooperative exchange rate and market exchange rate. That is because the market exchange rate began to increase sharply last year. This is the monthly trend of market exchange rate from 2019 to present. As you can see, from fourth quarter in 2020, market exchange rate began to show the abnormal trend. In particular, from second half of 2023, market exchange rate started to increase sharply. I think that the sharp rise of the market exchange rate is due to the policy intervention in pricing and finance. When we look over the policy shift related to pricing and finance, they discussed the issue of improving fiscal and financial management at February 2023 party plenary meetings, and they emphasized on establishment of scientific national financial system. I think that dealing with the fiscal and financial issue as the main subject at plenary meeting is very unusual. I think this discussion at plenary meeting is reflected in amendment of the central bank law. They introduced the establishment of the Unified Electronic Payment Center. In addition, we should focus on another measure to raise the state set price and wage. As I mentioned, they raised the state supply price of rice from 48 North Korean won to 2,000 North Korean won. I think this measure is related to the introduction of state sale channel. So I understand authority needed to reduce the gap between the state supply price and state sale price. And also they needed to raise the state set wage in order for workers to buy grain at grain sale centers. So this series of policy shift could affect market indicators, and this policy intervention could explain the increasing volatility of market indicators. The background and intention is very clear. Worsening fiscal condition and the unfavorable food condition could explain the policy change. As you can see, from 2021, the authorities' fiscal condition started to worsen. And also in 2020, North Korea faced the worst food production quantity since 2012. So North Korean authorities need to increase the fiscal revenue and also to control grain and essential goods in the formal sectors. I will conclude with my prospects. I understand that North Korean authorities also have concern about the spike in market indicators as the side effect of the policy change. Last year, the North Korean authority replaced the Minister of Finance. I think this could be the signal of their concern. Therefore, we observed the fewer mention of price and financial issue at recent plenary meeting and the Supreme People's Assembly. So as no further policy intervention observed, I think that market indicators maintain relatively stable this year. According to news report, last year, North Korea people had anxiety about the possibility of currency reform. However, these kinds of anxiety seem to have reduced recently. Therefore, I think that the market indicators are expected to converge a new equilibrium higher than existing level. In particular, North Korea faced the continuous foreign trade deficit, so market exchange rate could converge a new equilibrium in a higher level than existing level. I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ji-young, and thank you for concluding your presentation on time there. That was really accurate. And let me move on to the next topic, which is North Korea's trade. Jangho, I'd like to turn to you now. Could you share your insights from trade statistics and satellite data analysis, particularly focusing on the period since the COVID-19 pandemic?
Hello, this is Jangho Choi from Kiev. Today I will present North Korea's economy from 2020 to 2024, insight from trade statistics and satellite data. In this presentation, I would argue that North Korea's economic situation has been gradually improving since 2020 by looking at trade data and satellite imagery. Okay. There are two pictures in this slide. On the right side, bottom side. This poster shows the North Korean economy's new policy, local development policy, 20 times 10. We need to look at it more in detail. In this slide, I like to talk about North Korea's internal and external economic environment. And North Korea has visibly strengthened its ties with Russia, especially in military cooperation. In contrast, North Korea's relations with China has cooled. Even in 2024, the 75th anniversary of North Korea-China relations, celebrations were muted and few new projects took place. Moreover, China applied some pressures on North Korea in mid-2024 regarding its missile and nuclear activity, but eased off later that year. China's pressure on North Korea was due to the signing of a new treaty between North Korea and Russia, as well as its view that expanded military cooperation was not in China's international interest. Crucially, I believe that this deterioration in North Korea and China relations did not lead the drop in North Korea's foreign currency earning. Pyongyang managed to sustain its foreign income despite the chill down relations with China. The structure of foreign currency earning have affected the role of a government in North Korea economy. A major change since 2020 is in North Korea's foreign currency earning structure. Before the pandemic, most of North Korea's hard currency earning came from exporting goods such as mineral, textile, etc., which meant many traders and North Korean workers were involved and benefited. After 2020, as North Korea's trade declined, the regime turned to illicit income sources, cryptocurrency hacking, and arms sales. These activities are run by state agency, concentrating foreign currency earning in the government's hands. This has changed the government's role in the economy. Pre-pandemic, the state mostly tolerated private market growth and then taxed or extracted resources from it. However, post-pandemic, with ample foreign cash of its own, the government can actively spend on and direct the economy. In short, the state has shifted its role from a passive collector of foreign currency to a more active state-driven economic manager in the past few years. With more resources at its disposal, North Korea has adjusted both its external and internal policies. However, due to time constraint, I'm going to skip this slide. Let me summarize the chapter 1. North Korea's economic strategy has undergone structural changes. It has fundamentally shifted how it earns foreign currency revenue and how the state manages the economy. This shift has contributed to the gradual state-led management of North Korean economy and the gradual improvement in economic situation since 2020. I will now explore this more specifically with trade statistics and satellite imagery analysis. Okay. After 2020 border shutdown, trade between North Korea and China gradually recovered. By 2023, imports from China had rebounded strongly. However, in 2024, last year, North Korea's import from China fell to about 1.83 billion, an 8.5 decrease from 2023. This raises the question, did North Korea's economy weaken again in 2024? A decline in North Korea's import from China might suggest that economic difficulties have reduced the purchasing power of North Korean economy. It could also be argued that the economic difficulties were worsened in 2024 because North Korea still closed its border and continued cooperation with North Korea. But a closer look at the statistics suggests otherwise. To understand why, we need to see which import items dropped. The 2024 drop in imports from China was concentrated in just a few categories, notably rice, fertilizers, tobacco, and medicine, which together fell by around $247 million. These are goods that North Korea can import from Russia. Indeed, North Korea's imports from Russia surged in 2024 from about $40 million in 2023 to overcome $200 million in 2024. In effect, North Korea substituted Chinese suppliers with the Russian won for many essentials. When you combine imports from China and Russia, North Korea's total import in 2024 were about the same as the year before. The economy wasn't cutting back its consumption. It was redirecting its trade. In short, the decline in trade with China was largely offset by trade with Russia. This slide shows the import of strategic goods, dual-use goods. Another insight from the trade data is North Korea's drive to acquire strategic goods, items that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. In 2024, North Korea's import roughly 47 million US dollar worth of these dual-use goods from China, jumped nearly 37% compared to the 2023. This big increase suggests North Korea was gearing up its industrial and military production. Likely factors include preparing to manufacture more weapons or supplies for export to Russia, investing in its 20 times 10 local development policy, and generally upgrading machinery and its plants. The surge in dual-use imports indicates that manufacturers were being retooled or supplied with new equipment, a sign of heightened industrial activity. And this slide shows the revitalizing the steel industry in North Korea. The country's import of key steelmaking materials like coke, a coal product for smelting, bitumen, and pitch, spiked in 2024 to their highest levels since 2017. This indicates that North Korean steel mills dramatically increased production in 2024. The primary reason is likely the demand for steel to produce weapons and other military hardware. The graph on this slide illustrates the surge. It shows, however, the several years of stagnation. Heavy industry was revitalized to meet the regime's strategic needs. In this slide, I'm going to talk about the satellite data analysis. This slide shows the North Korean factories' activity. Using infrared satellite data, I tracked the heat output from 281 North Korean factories. The idea is simple. An active factory running machinery will emit more heat than an idle one. The chart here shows the factory activity index derived from surface temperatures. The result, industrial activity, hit its lowest point in 2022, and then recovered in 2023. During the height of the pandemic, manufacturers were likely to shut or idle, but by 2023, as borders partially reopened and the state pushed the production, factories become busier. By 2024, the thermal data suggests North Korean industrial output was significantly up from the 2020 slump, and this confirms that a modest industrial rebound was underway. You cannot see 2024 in the figure, but my analysis shows that 2024 is even better than 2023. And this slide shows the satellite imagery of rail yards and the train station, provides another measure of economic activity. Here, analysis observed that the volume of a freight, for example, counting the rail cars and the cargo visible at the major station, I found that the rail freight traffic in North Korea bottomed out around 2021 when border trade was physically frozen. From 2020 onward, the amount of cargo moving by train has risen. By 2023, there were clearly more freight train and goods were being handled at the key station compared to the peak of the lockdown period. And this slide shows the truck traffic in major cities in North Korea. We see a similar trend on the road by analyzing satellite image. I can estimate the number of trucks in motion on North Korean highways. The data shows that urban road traffic was extremely low in 2022, but then increased in 2023. The rise in truck movement means goods were being distributed more freely and commercially in the cities, and it was recovering. And this slide shows the activity in local markets. Satellite imagery was used to analyze change in people and cargo around the market. The activity index for these markets shows a clear pattern clear pattern. It grows in 2017 and 2021 and plugged in 2020 and then rebounded by 2020 and 2023. By late 2023, major markets in North Korea were bustling again. This indicates that the informal economy, local private market sprang back once lockdown lifted, and they continued to play a vital role in providing goods to the population. And conclusion, from 2020 and 2024, North Korea's economy seemed to have found a way to survive the UN sanctions and coronavirus border lockdown. The regime developed new foreign currency streams, and trade with China was partially substituted by trade with Russia, and industrial output and overall economic activity began recovering after 2021. North Korea now balance two key partners, China and Russia. This diversification gives some flexibility against pressure from either side. And as of 2024, we see a regime that can stabilize the economy and even achieve a modest rebound, and largely on its own terms. And this is all I have. I'm stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jangho. I think your the satellite data analysis was really fascinating and suggesting that we should develop a more developed, advanced research tools for our analysis of the North Korean economy. Next, I'd like to turn to Bruce to discuss the prospects for new sanctions monitoring under the Trump 2.0 administration. Bruce, what do you see in your crystal ball? What kinds of changes or continuities should we be expecting in sanctions enforcement?
Well, I think when we look at U.S. policy right now, the crystal ball is very cloudy, and I don't know or we don't know is often the answer that most of the Korea watchers are using nowadays. But first of all, thank you for the opportunity to do this. I'm not clever enough to figure out how to do PowerPoint, so you're just going to have to look at me the whole time. When we mention sanctions, it often triggers preconceptions by a lot of people. So a little bit of context first is, the debate over the utility of sanctions in foreign policy, it usually devolves to this binary debate of whether the U.S. should use pressure or negotiations or engagement. And the reality is, of course, you need both of those along with a lot of other tools of national power, economic assistance, military deterrence, alliances, public diplomacy, et cetera. And rather than being used in isolation, all of those tools are most effective when they're integrated into a comprehensive strategy, using them all together. And sanctions and engagement are both a means to an objective rather than an end in and of themselves. And a point, that's a point that's often lost on those who claim that just resumption of negotiations is some kind of success. Now, to be effective, sanctions must include a way to reduce their impact eventually as an incentive to end the behavior that triggered them by your opponent, just as engagement must carry a penalty when the conditions of that engagement or the negotiations are violated. Now, turning to North Korea, beginning in 2006, the UN Security Council passed 11 resolutions condemning North Korea for its nuclear and missile activity and imposed sanctions for the regime's violations of previous resolutions. And Moscow and Beijing allowed incrementally stronger resolutions after North Korea's repeated nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile tests. But although they did reject stronger text and sanctions, which have been proposed by the US and its allies. So there was just this step-by-step increase in pressure or conditions for pressure by Moscow and Russia. I'm sorry, Moscow and Beijing. Now, Russia and China would implement the new sanctions that were required under those resolutions, usually for a few months, before again turning a blind eye to violations, including on their soil or by their ships. And while some claim that North Korea's continuing development of nuclear and missile weapons shows that sanctions don't work and should be abandoned, a standard that could be equally applied to the numerous failed international denuclearization agreements that Pyongyang signed, the reality is that weak implementation of sanctions doesn't work. So for years, successive US administrations pulled their punches on fully enforcing US laws against North Korean, Chinese, and other violators, even for criminal actions in the US financial system. Now, how is North Korea evading sanctions? Well, beyond the weak implementation of sanctions, Pyongyang evades the impact of the sanctions through several methods. Payments from Russia for the North Korean military assistance, cyber crimes, and North Korean workers overseas. Now, first turning to the Russian largesse for North Korean military assistance, we know that North Korea has provided massive amounts of military assistance to Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. One study estimated that North Korea's shipments of millions of artillery shells, dozens of ballistic missiles, as well as artillery systems, could be worth up to $5.5 billion. And those figures don't seem to appear to include the price of the artillery weapon systems, just seems to include the price of the artillery shells and the missiles. And Pyongyang could also receive between $150 million and $550 million in annual revenue for the deployment of troops. And that estimate's based on Russia's promise of a one-time bonus of $4,600 and a monthly salary of $2,000 for recruits, with the majority of that funding going directly to the regime. And Russia is estimated to have supplied North Korea with at least 1 million barrels of oil in 2024, according to satellite imagery analysis. And the imagery report identified more than a dozen different North Korean oil tankers arriving at an oil terminal in Russia's Far East, a total of 43 times during just an 8-month period in 2024. And all of those transfers violate UN Security Council resolution sanctions, which limit North Korea to importing only 500,000 barrels of refined petroleum annually. Along with the Russian assistance is sort of food, fuel, and funding, and then military technology transfer that is much harder to identify. The second major area is cyber crimes, and that's been ongoing for quite some time. Kim Jong-un declared that cyber warfare is a magic weapon and an all-purpose sword that guarantees the North Korean People's Armed Forces ruthless striking capability. And despite people having this perception that North Korea is sort of this technologically backward nation, they often look at the the very famous nighttime satellite imagery where North Korea is black, whereas all the surrounding countries are ablaze with lights. US and South Korean intelligence have assessed that North Korea is in the top tier of global cyber threats, usually really in the top 4 countries. And North Korea is unique amongst those cyber capable nations in prioritizing cyber crimes to finance its nuclear missile programs and circumvent international sanctions and undermine the impact of those sanctions on the regime. And it's been assessed that Pyongyang is responsible for 61% of all crypto heists in the world. Cyber crimes there are more efficient, more cost-effective, and lucrative than Pyongyang's past illicit activities of counterfeiting of currency or pharmaceuticals, and more lucrative than the recent smuggling and ship-to-ship transfers of oil. So the regime's cyber crimes are global in scope. They provide astronomical returns on investment and are low risk, since it's often difficult to detect and attribute with little likelihood of international retribution. In 2022, the US Secretary of Homeland Security stated that in the last 2 years alone, North Korea has largely funded its weapons of mass destruction program through cyber heists of cryptocurrencies as well as hard currencies. And then the following year, a US official estimated that half of North Korea's missile program had been funded through cyber attacks and cryptocurrency theft. It's estimated that North Korea has cumulatively gained $3 billion from cybercrime during 2017 to 2022. And then since then, Pyongyang stole $1.7 billion in 2022, $1.3 billion in 2024, and $1.5 billion in a single cyber heist this year. And now for context, North Korea's total gross domestic product in 2019 was $29 billion. And in 2022, Pyongyang's total legitimate international trade was $1.59 billion, less than its gains that year from cyber crimes. And then the third main category is North Korean overseas workers. So UN Security Council Resolution 2397, which was adopted in December of 2017, required all UN member states to repatriate all North Korean workers within their borders by December of 2019. And despite that requirement, more than 100,000 North Korean laborers continue to work in 40 countries, but most are in Russia and China. They generate an estimated annual revenue of $500 million for Pyongyang, and they labor in factories, agriculture, construction, logging camps, and mining operations. And North Korea also operates restaurants in at least 5 countries, generating $700 million in annual revenue for the regime. And in addition to the laborers, North Korea sends thousands of infotech workers overseas for activities that are both illicit as well as legitimate, although all prescribed by UN resolutions. Some of the North Korean IT workers can earn $300,000 per year, with 90% of those wages going to the regime. And overall, that program generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually for the regime to fund its nuclear missile programs. Now, turning to UN action, it's really unlikely that there will be any additional resolutions or sanctions from the UN. We've seen that in recent years, Russia and China have become even more obstructionist in the UN Security Council, vetoing any proposed new resolutions or sanctions following previous North Korean violations. They've also proposed adding sunset clauses to allow existing sanctions to expire. And also identifying and exposing North Korean violations will be harder after Russia vetoed last year the annual authorization mandate for the UN panel of experts. Russia and China, 2 of the most egregious violators of UN resolutions, routinely blocked or watered down reports by the panel of experts in recent years. And then half-hearted enforcement of US laws and UN sanctions by the US administrations undermine the effectiveness of international efforts to hold North Korea as well as other nations accountable for violating those laws. The U.S. has long refrained from going after Chinese and Russian banks and businesses that are assisting North Korea. And the U.S. Imposed over $10 billion in fines on a French bank in the past for money laundering for Iran, Cuba, and Sudan. But the U.S. has yet to impose fines on any Chinese bank for money laundering for North Korea. Now, what will the Trump administration do in the current term? Well, I think if we look at the first term, there was a very poor track record of sanctions enforcement during the first term. Trump's maximum pressure was never maximum. Like its predecessors, the Trump administration talked tough about imposing pressure on North Korea, but hesitated to fully enforce UN sanctions and US laws. So prior to the 2018 Singapore summit, Trump declared that while the US Treasury had announced that additional large-scale sanctions would be added on North Korea, I have today ordered the withdrawal of those additional sanctions. He also announced that he would not sanction 300 North Korean entities violating US law because we're talking so nicely. And I can't really put on new sanctions when I'm meeting with Kim. I thought it would be disrespectful. And I don't even want to use the term maximum pressure. And then beyond that, Trump prevented Treasury Department's plan to impose sanctions on 36 Russian and Chinese entities providing assistance to North Korea. He reversed Treasury Department imposed sanctions on 2 Chinese shipping companies. He took no action against 12 Chinese banks that Congress recommended be sanctioned for committing money laundering crimes in the US financial system. And despite the collapse of US-North Korean negotiations or even dialogue after the Hanoi summit, Trump took no action against Pyongyang. And more recently, he's extolled his close friendship and love letters with Kim Jong-un and his desire to re-engage with Kim. And we've just seen reports overnight that the US has been engaged with North Korea in some kind of dialogue. And it's far more likely, I think, that Trump would acquiesce to a peace declaration or limited denuclearization agreement than impose strong sanctions against North Korea for its continuing violations of UN resolutions and US laws. So, kamsahamnida, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Bruce. It sounds like your crystal ball has been sharing a lot of information with you. Troy, thank you for your patience. I think you have the last word here. As Bruce has suggested, the evolving sanctions landscape may open new avenues or present new challenges for engaging in North Korea. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts on how the end of the Ukraine war could impact North Korea's economy and U.S. engagement strategy under the current administration.
Thank you, Yonho, and thank you to everybody who went ahead. I'm probably going to touch on a lot of things that we saw from both Jangho and Bruce. At the end of the day, a lot of the potential for U.S. engagement with with North Korea is dependent on how this war ends. To put this sort of big picture, right now, Kim Jong-un has a very good deal with Russia. And so if you look at this in the context of the U.S. really gaining any, traction, there has to be a question of what we're willing to put on the table, and does that take and either complement what Russia is providing North Korea, or does it take and exceed what Russia is providing North Korea? And, in this broader context, as Bruce mentioned, President Trump, it seems like almost on a weekly basis, talks about how, he and Kim Jong-un are good friends and how, he's sure that Kim misses him and that they'd like to meet. But what we do know is that there's also been reporting in the last few days that Kim Jong-un is likely to go to Russia in May to meet with Putin. So this is a growing relationship. It's one that has become the prominent relationship for North Korea. And so a lot of the context around engagement really hinges on this. And so when we think about this relationship in the U.S. context, much of the leverage that the U.S. had, setting aside even whether, Bruce's comment about the U.S. never really went for maximum pressure under President Trump. It's a different environment now. We have seen not only did North Korea take and go through the pandemic with its borders closed and come to the realization that it could likely survive extreme isolation economically, but we've also seen, and this is something that has come to the fore since the panel of experts was disbanded, has more of the members have just been more frank that, basically after the Hanoi summit, Russia and China both stopped really enforcing sanctions. So you have the two major economic partners who are uninterested, perhaps, in applying the pressure the U.S. would like to see, one of whom is willing to, at least in the case of Russia, blatantly violate those sanctions and do so on a regular basis. So there really isn't a lot of negotiating leverage for the United States in this context. And so one of the things that's interesting about how the war ends, prior to the election, one colleague of mine who was close to the Trump people had suggested that they might try to take and make ending the relationship between Russia and North Korea one of the conditions for Russia for ending the war. That never seemed like a viable option, even though it was somewhat interesting, just because, once again, the United States didn't really have a lot of leverage over Russia to try and really, induce that type of outcome. But the other direction, and we'll have to see how these early talks with the North Koreans are going, was that one way you could apply pressure to Russia to end the war would be to try and cut off the military supplies from North Korea. But once again, that raises the question of what would the U.S. be willing to put on the table that would be attractive or not as attractive as what Russia is offering. So what is the current state of the relationship between Russia look like on the economic side? Well, Russia, who isn't putting out detailed trade data anymore, had suggested that in 2023 that trade had significantly grown and was 34.4 million. A private estimate I'd seen, and this is different from what Jangho had said earlier with his 200 million, but was that at least through the first 6 months of last year, that had grown to 52.9 million. So significant growth over 2023, whether it's this more conservative estimate or the larger one that Jangho talked about earlier. But we've also seen a significant jump in bilateral meetings of senior officials. One estimate has it that there's almost about an average of 2 per month since Kim and Putin met originally in September of 2023. But we're talking about discussion for cooperation on science, information technology, agriculture, other economic areas. There seems to be a real attempt to build out the relationship, even beyond sort of the almost annual now summit meetings between Putin and Kim. And so that suggests that the two parties are viewing this as a relationship that they want to maintain. It's something that Kim Jong-un has publicly suggested. But there are likely also incentives for Russia to keep this relationship going after the war ends, and I'll get into that in some detail a little bit later. But this is a growing relationship, one to where there's been economic growth, there's been military cooperation growth, and there's been political cooperation as well. So what do we know about the relationship right now? And a lot of these details have been mentioned by both Jangho and Bruce, but sort of let's kind of go through it. I'll try to add a little bit more detail and maybe explain some of the numbers. So South Korean intelligence around November of last year put out an estimate that there have been around 9 million artillery rounds that have gone from Russia to from North Korea to Russia. Now, because these are based off of what would fit in containers that they've seen across the border, there's questions of whether this is 122 meter artillery or 155 millimeter artillery. But the general consensus tends to be that, this artillery is probably worth about $4.3 billion. And the way you get that is I had early on, back when this first started, had sort of tried to basically benchmark this based off what it costs Russia to produce artillery, and then give it a discount rate of 50%. Subsequently, South Korean intelligence put out an estimate that was almost exactly the same. It was at basically that each artillery round is probably worth, in terms of a cash value, going from Russia to North Korea, about $487. So that's how you get the 4.3 billion. Each additional million shells, and apologies, I seem to have left a number off there, but is worth about $500 million more to North Korea. So if we think about this in the context, the 9 million round estimate came out in November. We are now, basically in April. I would suspect that at least another million, maybe two, have gone from North Korea to Russia. And, also keep this in context of why this is so valuable to Russia. Russia has held a significant artillery advantage over Ukraine during this war. And that is primarily, well, I shouldn't say primarily, it is in essence because of the artillery they have received from North Korea. I've been doing the calculations on this. And if you look at artillery of all rounds provided by the United States and its allies to Ukraine since the beginning of the war, and conveniently DoD at the end of the Biden administration put out a fairly detailed analysis of what the U.S. itself has provided, and then compare that to what North Korea alone has provided Russia. North Korea has provided more artillery to Russia than the U.S. and its allies have provided to Ukraine. Now, we can get into discussions of the usage of those artillery and what the quality of the North Korean artillery is, but this is a significant difference that we're talking about in terms of the U.S. and all of its allies as opposed to North Korea alone. But beyond that, we've seen on the battlefield that the KN-23, sometimes also, or the North Koreans refer to it as Hwasong-11, has been provided. The estimates are that there's been, from last year, 150 were provided, that North Korea was going to provide 150 more this year. Those are similar to the Iskander-M missiles, which roughly $3 million for North Korea to produce. So you can take and come up with a range of estimates of what that might be worth for the North Koreans in terms of exchange. Bruce has mentioned the troops. I didn't include the bonus, but roughly that comes out to about 21.6 million per month. There's also been reports that there have been 177 millimeter self-propelled guns and 240 millimeter multiple rocket launchers provided. We also know that North Korea is providing medical services for injured Russian troops. Russia has also, just on the purely economic level, has approved North Korean beer for import. There are indications that there's growing trade in things like ginseng, cosmetics, confections, and then, of course, as Bruce mentioned, the overseas laborers. So then the question becomes, what does North Korea get in return? Whether this is literally in dollars or they're simply doing some type of transaction sheet. A lot of this return is also things that it's going to be hard for us to put a tangible estimate to. Russia's willingness to engage in sanctions violations to provide military technology, if that's only the IP or if it's only, we've seen suggestions that, for example, on the subs that the North Koreans are looking to build, that Russian personnel have been there. The same with the satellite telemetry on the first satellite launch. How much are they valuing the services trade, if you will, as opposed to trading goods? But there's the estimate of 1 million barrels of oil having been transferred. The BBC has suggested that there's an understanding that there would be 600,000 to 700,000 annual tons of rice provided to North Korea. We also have seen evidence that there's other food items such as wheat, cooking oil, non-food items such as wood that are going. North Korea opened up to Russian tourists, and about 800 Russian tourists went last year. So in the grand scheme of things, that's small potatoes. But in terms of military hardware, outside of the satellite technology and the submarine technology, South Korean intelligence reported that anti-aircraft missiles have been provided by Russia to North Korea. This is hard because they didn't identify which Russian system it is. Some of those systems are relatively inexpensive. One of them is very expensive. Based off my estimate of what North Korea is likely owed by Russia for the military technology or weapons it's provided, if it was the most expensive anti-aircraft system, that would probably cover a lot of what North Korea's earned. So I'm guessing it's probably on the one on the cheaper side, given that there's other things in the package that we're seeing. But this also starts to raise kind of questions of, what is it that maybe Russia's providing that we're not seeing evidence of? One thing that I did do in the trade data, and I want to stress that this is somewhat challenging to do, and this touches on what Jangho talked about. North Korean trade, even before the pandemic, would be erratic from year to year, month to month, if you looked at it. So, keep all of this in mind. But there is one interesting thing, which is that after the first meeting between Putin and Kim, you do see a significant drop in certain key products, fertilizer being one of them, in terms of imports from China. Clearly, fertilizer is something, Russia being the world's largest producer, that they can easily provide. There is some indications in recent months that North Korea has started importing more fertilizer from China. And so that's why you see here, the bar start to go up after bottoming out in 2023. But you can see that, cereals, tobacco, all of these products, there has been a decline over the last year or so in terms of imports from China. And so, I completely agree with Jangho that what we're seeing most likely is that there are certain items that North Korea is now receiving from Russia rather than China. And so that's really kind of what is most likely going on in the trade data. And so in that context, yes, these are complementary. If you also look at the other items that North Korea is importing from China, in essence, all of them have grew in terms of imports. So over the last year. So what I think you're really seeing is, even though the overall, and because fertilizer is a relatively expensive in the broader and large category in the broader context of overall imports from China, is that you're seeing a growth overall in terms of imports from China in the broader sense, but in the data, it looks like there's a decline because you have, these sort of key categories coming out and going over to Russia. So I think there's a little bit of nuance we need to keep in mind in terms of the trade relationship between China and North Korea, that it is growing. It's just growing in other areas right now. So if President Trump is successful and able to take at some time, this year, bring an end to the Ukraine war, what are the likely outcomes for Russia-North Korea relations? And so I think there's sort of three buckets that you can kind of put this in. One is that the relationship remains largely the same. Now, built into this is a assumption that European analysts are correct that once the war ends, Russia will look to take and rearm, and that it will take, and whatever the time frame is, look to either finish the war in Ukraine by attacking again a weakened Ukraine, or attacking one of the other Eastern European states, be it a Baltic state or somewhere else, to try and finally take and dismantle NATO. So in that context, you're likely to still see maybe not the same amounts as we're seeing right now, but continued flows of arms from North Korea to Russia, which would then take and help compensate for the inflow of grains, fuel, and other items, and perhaps also continued military technology. The other option is that economic ties remain, but because the war has ended, Russia needs less weapons or doesn't need any weapons at all from North Korea. But so you see a relationship that remains, but that the economic ties are at a reduced level from what we're seeing now. And then the other option, which I think is the least likely, is that the relationship reverts to a pre-Ukraine war state. Now, The real question, because I think out of those, the middle option is probably the most likely option, is, can this relationship be sustained? And I think we need to consider that there are certain common interests that Russia and North Korea share. One of which, and perhaps the most important driving one, is an administrative role for the U.S. in international affairs. So that includes, a lessening of the ability of the United States to implement and enforce sanctions, a lessening of the U.S. ability to take and sort of shape international affairs, a weakening of U.S. alliances. These are things that Russia and North Korea share in common. In that same context, they share, and we saw this through Russian initiatives in the BRICS, the development of a non-U.S. financial system, which would allow for a broader range of transactions and more transactions that are not traceable by the U.S. and that wouldn't allow for the U.S. to really impose financial sanctions. So, in essence, Bruce, to try and find a way to get around the banking sanctions that you mentioned as well. And then both share an interest as two countries highly under sanctions and evading sanctions just in general. And I think that remains even if the Trump administration at the end of the war lifts a lot of the sanctions. There's questions about whether the European Union would lift its sanctions, so those could remain in place. And at the same time, I think one of the things that we need to keep in context is I think it's highly improbable that when the war ends, Russia is going to go back to enforcing UN sanctions on North Korea. So in essence, that is one major factor that I think is now permanently changed, is that, maybe there's a way we could take and bring the Chinese back on board through different methods or persuasion. But I think Russia, that is just not going to happen. I mentioned the Russia rearmament factor. Commercial trade, I think, will be maintained at a higher level than the pre-war and, to be honest, pandemic, because Russia's trade with North Korea was always relatively low. And I think that there's a growing interest and understanding that the two countries need to work together to give each other more options, both economically and strategically. And so in that context, I think you're likely to see economic exchanges continue after the war. And so what does that mean then for U.S. engagement with North Korea? As I mentioned at the beginning, yeah.
Oh, we have only 15 minutes left, so why don't we save that topic for our
Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you. So I think all the panelists are almost on the same page in terms of their analysis of the current status of North Korean economy and prospects of U.S.-North Korea relations, the Russia factor. But I was wondering if you have any comments or questions for the other panelists.
I have a technical question for Jangho. Similar to Yanho, I was very impressed by the satellite data. I'm just curious how you get the older satellite data. I just wasn't sure if that would be available.
Oh, yeah. We're using the EU-based satellite data imagery. They are free, and the data you can download it on the web from 2015 to current year. So using those data, we analyze the past history of North Korean economy. Yes.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Then let me ask my quick question for Jiyoung. I'm very much personally interested in the electronic payment system in North Korea, and I understand it has been years for North Korea to introduce the system into their banking system, and I wonder how has the people's perception and reactions to the new developments. And I wonder if the new banking system based on electronic payment is working well.
사실 실제로 북한의 이런 전자결제 시스템이 어느
North
정도
Korea's
확산되어
e-payment
있는지를
system, the spread of
확인하기는
e-payment
어렵지만
system cannot be confirmed at this
북한에
moment.
대한 홍보
However,
기사나 이런
when you look into the
것들을 보면
articles or media covered in the North Korea,
전자결제가 조금씩
we finally
국지적으로
understand that
확대되고 있는 것
e-payment system
같다라는
has been
기사가 과거에
gradually
비해서는
spread
최근에
across the
조금 많이
country.
등장하고 있습니다. 그리고 최근에 이제 북한을
And
떠난
recently,
탈북자들을 인터뷰한 바에 따르면
according to the interview with North Korean
최근에
defectors,
이런 시스템 전환 이후에
after the system
이제
transition,
시장에서 장사를 하고 이제 결제를 할 때도 국가에서
sellers
카드 사용을
who are
장려한다.
working in the
이런
market,
정책을
the
실시하고
state is
있다.
also
이런
encouraging them
지원을
to
하는
use the credit card,
탈북자들도
and such
있었습니다.
evidence have been made by
근데
North
제가
Korean
이제 주목하는
defectors.
바는
And the thing that
북한의
I
이런
have paid
결제 제도
attention to here
전환이
is that
북한
such
주민들한테는
transition of
어떤
payment system in the north
급진적인 정책 전환으로
might be a
다가올
little
수가
bit
있고
progressive for
특히
North Korean
북한의
residents.
2009년 화폐 개혁
And
실패의 어떤 충격이 있기
there was
때문에
the huge
이런 것들이
currency
북한
reform failure
주민들이
in
좀 더
2009.
외화를
And that is the
보유하려고
reason
하는
why more and more North
이런
Koreans prefer to
어떤
reserve a foreign currency
수요를 좀
in their own
불러와서
pocket.
환율을
And with
급등시킨
that
것이
demands,
아닐까.
this is
저는
another
그 부분에
reason
좀
for the
주목을
sharp
하고 있습니다.
increase of their FX rates.
Thank you. I think we have one question from Karida Reed, a Korea-focused research assistant at CNA Corporation. And this question is for Troy. Do we see or can we see signs that DPRK is preparing for any of the three scenarios you mentioned?
So, if we look at the political rhetoric coming out of Pyongyang, and as I mentioned, this effort to take and have Kim Jong-un meet Vladimir Putin later this year, I think they're trying to take and build as robust a post-war relationship as possible. Ultimately, there are advantages for them in taking and maintaining as close ties as possible with Russia. One, it gives them an alternative to China and it lessens Chinese influence. Two, out of all of their potential partners, Russia so far has shown a willingness to take and transfer military technology to an extent that, even if the Chinese perhaps looked the other way on certain things in the past, that Russia is now more willing to explicitly do. And so it probably makes this a much easier relationship for them. So, I think from everything I see, this is a relationship they want to maintain. I think ultimately it comes down to where does Putin fall at the end of the war, and how does Russia see its longer term relationship with North Korea? And in this context, one colleague of mine who's a Russia expert suggested that Putin's determination has been that Russia made a mistake by ending its relationship with partners like North Korea at the end of the war, and that in a new geostrategic environment, it will need partners like North Korea going forward. If they're correct, that would suggest that Putin is going to be open to maintaining these types of ties.
Thank you. And we have a question from Neil Watts with CCSI. What is the trend regarding coal exports from North Korea, which used to be one of their biggest revenue generators? So I think this question is for Jangho, I guess.
예, 북한의 외화 수입 중 가장
So
많은
out of
비중을
North
차지하고 있는
Korea's
게 석유
foreign currency
수출이었습니다.
revenue, the biggest portion comes from
하지만
oil
그것은
export.
과거의 얘기고
However, that was the
지금
story of the past.
가장 많은
Nowadays,
수출에서 가장 많이 이루어지는
out
것은
of the
석유
export,
수출로 보여집니다.
the biggest proportion comes from
가발, 가구,
textile
프로문성
export. For
등등
example, wigs and eyelashes, such
통계에 드러나고
textile
있지만
exports accounts for more than 50%. And also the export of clothes and apparels have been made a lot. And the coal export has been done in a smuggling format. However, there have been a lot of reports that there are so many smugglings, but it doesn't mean that there are a lot of official exports of clothing. And most of them have been smuggled and that have been monitored and identified by the monitoring group.
Thank you. And the next question is from Marcus Noland. This question is for Ji Young. There were anecdotal accounts of SOE workers being issued wage cards, which could be only used in state stores and might allow the regime to track expenditures. Is this practice widespread?
아직 그런 관행이 보편적으로
Actually, this type of practice
확산되어 있는 것이 확인되진 않았습니다.
has not been confirmed to be widespread
사실 이제
and
북한의 어떤
generalized
전기 사정이나
because you have to think about the electricity situation and the infrastructure situation in North Korea. So the electronic payment system, can that be expanded rapidly? Some people are skeptical about that. But what we have to keep in mind is that North Korean authority, when it comes to the payment information of the Korean people, and also when it comes to the price that is applied by the suppliers and the buyers, and whether they want to have the control over that, I think that is for certain. And when it comes to the North Korean authorities, when they impose taxes or collect taxes, they want to make sure that the taxes are not being leaked. So that is the purpose of those actions. But are these issued wage cards being used in a widespread manner? That is not, I cannot ascertain that for the time being.
Thank you. Before we get another question from the audience, let me ask one quick question to Bruce. Oh, Bruce, do you have any comments?
Yes, I received a question. I gave a minimalist answer, which then I think moved it out of your queue.
Okay.
So the questions to me were, how do I think the Trump administration's policies towards North Korea will impact the economy? I don't think they're going to have much of an impact because I don't think he's going to do many sanctions, so that wouldn't be a punitive impact on the economy. And until there's some kind of negotiations that then Trump would reduce sanctions or provide benefits, that until that happens, there wouldn't be any positive impact on North Korea's economy. So I think right now there really will be no impact. The second question was, what role do I believe sanctions should play in addressing the North Korean threat? And I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be part of the overall strategy, though, as Roy pointed out, the environment for strong sanctions enforcement is much reduced from before, with the U.S. being lackadaisical, with China and Russia, particularly Russia, be very blatantly violating all these resolutions, with some impact on them, but little impact on North Korea. I think the hope for a good negotiated settlement with North Korea has plummeted because the sanctions tool, I think, has been reduced. And then, I don't have a lot of hopes for a good negotiation because I think Trump would be overeager for perhaps signing a peace declaration that would lay the foundation for reducing U.S. forces in the region without actually having solved the North Korean threat, including the conventional force threat.
Hey, Bruce, if you don't mind, I just have a quick follow-up on this. I think it was Besant who said this, but that the administration feels that we've overused sanctions and that they want to transition to using, at least to some extent, tariffs. And we've seen this in some of the moves on like Venezuela and some other countries to where you're using tariffs for non-economic policy issues. Do you think there's a chance that if they wanted to apply pressure, that they wouldn't? Because I mean, clearly this wouldn't work on putting tariffs on North Korea, given the economic relationship, but that the administration might be thinking about putting tariffs on China or Russia that are North Korea specific that would stay in place until they cut off either military cooperation or economic activity, with North Korea. So in other words, a different tool to try and achieve the same objective.
No, that's a good idea. I guess I'm a purist where I would, like tariffs to be used for economic purposes, to impose a penalty on those that are violating economic rules, rather than for non-economic reasons or purposes. But obviously we've crossed that bridge and I think burned it behind us. So that would be a way of doing it, but you know, that way you're going against a country rather than the specific entities that are violating it. So if you have a Chinese bank, like the Bank of China, violating the UN resolutions, you have all the laws you have, there to impose, if not declare them a money laundering concern and prevent them from using the US financial system, you could impose billions of dollars in fines on them, as we did against British and French banks. I guess sort of more broadly, you could just say, all right, China, you have a 10% tariff until you enforce sanctions, more effectively. It's possible. Maybe they see that as a quick way of doing it. I would prefer kind of using, law enforcement measures and UN resolutions, but it's definitely a possibility.
Okay, 장호?
좀 황당한 질문이긴 하지만
So I think this
5월에
might be a
있는
little bit silly
정상회담인데
question, but
트럼프
in
대통령이
May,
참여할 가능성이 있는지
in the
궁금합니다.
Russian conference, I'm
만약에
wondering whether there's any
4월 달에
possibility
러시아
for
우크라이나
for
전쟁이
Trump's
끝나면
visit. If the
5월
Ukraine war is
러시아
ended in
대선결에
April,
트럼프
then
대통령이
in
참여를 해서
some
미국과
conference in Russia, Trump can make a visit. And I'm wondering whether there's any possibility to talk about the denuclearization in the North. I have this question to Bruce.
Yeah, anything is a possibility at this point. That said, it would only be a little more than a month between now and the May 9th parade in Moscow. I am skeptical that they're going to have a conclusion to the Ukraine conflict by then. But if you want an agreement bad enough, you can settle for a bad agreement. And so I would think Trump would not go except if there was some satisfactory resolution of the Ukraine conflict. If there is that, it could be pitched as the US and Russia were allies during World War II, and here we're celebrating, it's Victory in Europe Day. But I'm skeptical that it could happen by May.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, but I think we can take one last question from Neil. This is probably for Jangho. The North Korean merchant fleet has expanded by 28 to 30% since 2020, and most have been making calls into Chinese ports. So what trade data can be inferred from this? 최정호 박사님?
So I have this
예.
question is to Dr. Choi.
저희가 실제로 로이드 영국에 있는 보험사인 선박 보험사인 로이드사
So we
정보를
we
활용해서
often leverage the data and information from Lloyd, which is the UK insurance company on shipbuilding, and we analyzed the shipping volume between China and North Korea. However, as we see from statistic data, since 2020, it is sure that there has not been that much increase of North Korean shipping going between China and North Korea. And recently,
the Chinese government continued to put a lot of pressure on the North. And in the past, whenever there's any trade between the North and China, they send the goods first, and then payment was made later on. However, as the relationship between China and North Korea get constrained, they have to pay first, and after they receive the payment, the goods are delivered. And the China accounts for more than 95% of trade with the North, and most of the ships are going to China from North Korea. But it doesn't mean that this has led to sharp increase of smuggling between North Korea and China. And it is true that China comply with the international sanctions and putting a lot of economic pressure on the North. So even if there are a lot of North Korean ships coming from North Korea to China, it doesn't mean that there have been sharp increase of smuggling between two countries.
Thank you, Jangho. I'd like to sincerely thank all our distinguished speakers for joining us today, especially our Korean speakers who stayed up late into the night to participate. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope you're able to get a good night's rest. And I'd also like to thank the GWIX and IPUS teams for organizing this event, and our simultaneous interpreters for their excellent service throughout the discussion. And of course, thank you all for joining us today. With that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you and take care.